Hello everyone and welcome to the Ticker.com's news channel on YouTube. On this channel, we review stock markets and discuss financial news, market trends, and economic data from Wall Street to Global Street. So let us get started. Global investors looked beyond multiple ongoing macroeconomic and geopolitical headwinds, and benchmark indices traded near record highs. Major central banks announced their rate decisions amid policymakers opting to stay on the sidelines or took cautious steps to keep economies from retreating and inflation from rebounding. The U.S. Federal Reserve held federal funds rate range unrevised between 4.25% and 4.5%. Federal Reserve policymakers held out for 2 additional rate cuts but decided to wait and await the impact of Trump administration's tariff and rising tensions in the Middle East. The annual U.S. retail sales increase slowed to a 7-month low of 3.3% in May as consumers pulled back from spending surge earlier in the year ahead of sky-high tariffs on imports. The overall monthly sales increased after consumers rushed in March to purchase automobiles and ahead of the Trump's 25% tariffs. U.S. housing starts dropped to a 5-year low in May amid affordability challenges and elevated mortgage rates. The sharp decline of 30% housing starts for multifamily homes overwhelmed the nearly 5% increase in single-family home starts. Across the Atlantic, the Bank of England held steady its policy rate at 4.25%, but policymakers held out for future rate cuts amid early signs of weakness in job market and weak economic outlook. Sweden lowered its policy rates by 25 basis points to 2%, and Norway trimmed its benchmark rate by the same amount to 4.25%. The Swedish policymakers estimated another rate cut in the year is likely, which could help inflation stabilize at lower rate and spur economic activities. The Norges Bank, the central bank of Norway, signaled future rate cuts, and it added that inflation has slowed at a faster than expected pace. The People's Bank of China held its loan prime rates in June after lowering rates by 10 basis points in May, confirming that the economy is holding up well despite the U.S. tariffs and rising trade tensions with the European Union. The Bank of Japan held its overnight call rate, which is a short-term rate, at 0.5%, citing tariff-driven uncertainty and accelerating inflation. Japan's consumer price inflation slowed 3.5% in May, and core inflation, which excludes food and not energy, accelerated for the 3rd consecutive month. In other economic news from around the world, U.S. homebuilders signaled continued weakness in the demand for new homes amid affordability challenges. China's retail sales rose at a faster than expected pace, but new home sales continued to fall from a year ago in May. India's trade deficit plunged more than 30% to $6.6 billion from $9.4 billion a year ago after exports rose and imports fell in May. Japan's international trade balance remained negative for the 2nd consecutive month in May, driven largely by the rise in imports. Let us review key events in global bond, currency, and commodity markets last week. The yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury held near 4.4% after investors assessed escalating tensions in the Middle East and uncertainty linked to the U.S. trade policy. Texas crude oil prices edged down to $73 a barrel and eased from the highest level since February last week, amid fears of regional supply disruptions and following escalating hostilities in the Middle East. Natural gas prices in Europe edged up about 5% to 40 euros per megawatt hour amid global supply worries as the U.S. prepares to escalate its direct and covert assistance to Israel's attack on Iranian nuclear assets. The euro stabilized at $1.15 as investors sought safety in the European currency amid escalating trade tensions in the Middle East and Sell America narrative. The yen appreciated to about 145 against the U.S. dollar as core inflation accelerated for the 3rd month in May, supporting the BOJ's case to continue its campaign to raise rates. Let us shift our attention to major stock markets in the U.S., Europe, and Asia. The S&P 500 index and the Nasdaq Composite edged down but traded near record highs despite multiple macroeconomic and geopolitical headwinds. European markets trimmed weekly losses, and defense and energy stocks led gainers in the week. The Nikkei 225 stock average truncated weekly gains amid growing consensus that the Bank of Japan will continue to raise rates, and weak exports signaled the possibilities of a technical recession. Hong Kong and China indices trimmed weekly losses after faster-than-expected retail sales, and central banks' rate decisions supported positive views on the economy. Indian market indices rebounded and halted losses in the previous 3 weeks, and exports growth calmed market anxieties. We now shift our attention to merger deals, market movers, and earnings update from leading companies last week. Progressive Corporation reported strong monthly results, and the insurance company said the total pre-tax net realized gains on securities increased 80% in May. Lennar Corporation released weak quarterly results, and the home builder guided a lower average price for new home deliveries in the current quarter. Korn Ferry International reported better-than-expected results in the fourth quarter, and the executive and professional recruitment company paid $25 million in dividend. Jabil Incorporated released strong quarterly results, and supply chain services provider reiterated its outlook. John Wiley & Sons surpassed analyst expectations in the fourth quarter, and the publishing company guided higher earnings per share for fiscal year 2026. Kroger reported better-than-expected revenue and earnings, driving the stock higher by almost 7% on Friday. Photon Energy swung to a profit in the first quarter, and the Netherlands-based solar power and energy storage company reported higher electricity generation. Flughafen Zurich said the number of local passengers at the Zurich airport increased in May, but the number of transfer passengers declined. Flughafen Wien, the operator of Vienna, Malta, and Kosice Airport, reported an increase in total passenger traffic in May. Hercules, the UK labor supply company, posted strong results for the first 6 months and held its interim dividend. Speedy Hire swung to a loss in the fiscal year 2025, despite the provider of tools and equipment hire services reporting growth in its testing, inspection, and certification business. Foshan Haitian Flavoring and Food Company, based in China, completed its initial public offering worth almost 10 billion Hong Kong dollars, or about 1.3 billion US dollars. And the China-based Popular Condiment Company attracted strong investor interest both from the retail and institutional side. In the week ahead, investors in the U.S. are looking forward to the release of manufacturing and services data, home sales, and consumer confidence update. Investors are also looking forward to the release of the GDP quarterly rate and monthly durable goods orders, and also retail inventories and international trade data. In addition, on the earnings front, investors are anticipating results from KB Home, FactSet Research Systems, FedEx, Carnival, Micron Technology, General Mills, Steelcase, Nike, Walgreens Boots, Alliance, and Lindsay Corporation. In Europe, investors are looking ahead to the release of manufacturing and services surveys in France, Germany, and the UK, and the Eurozone. Spain's balance of trade, GDP growth rate, and business confidence, and France's consumer confidence, unemployment benefit claims, and total job seekers data are also awaited. The UK will report on its current account and passenger car production data, and France is set to release its GDP growth rate, inflation, and producer price data on Friday. On the earnings front, in Europe, markets are anticipating results from S3 plc, Foresight Environmental, Telecom Plus, Duke Capital, Foresight Group, and Hennessy and Morris retailer. In Asia, investors are looking ahead to the release of Japan and India's manufacturing and service sector surveys data, retail sales, unemployment rate, and housing starts and construction orders. In addition, Tokyo area consumer price report is also on schedule on Friday. On the earnings front, investors in Asia are looking forward to release of earnings from Cato Holdings, Vitasoy International, SK REIT, Gold Peak Technology, Envision Greenwise, Precision Soup Gami, DL Holdings, Far East Consortium, and LK Technology Holdings. You can review daily U.S. and global financial market news, stock movers, earnings releases, SEC filings, and economic updates on ticker.com, 123jump.com. You can find the latest financial books on Rodera.com, keep up with financial industry events on eventsinamerica.com, review ETF and mutual fund performance and in-depth profiles on tickerfunds.com, and review market updates and stock movers in India on niveshak.in. That is all for today, and we will